It's a work session of Anchorage Assembly.
Unmute.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. This is a work session of the Anchorage Assembly. The work session today is on the topic of Assemblymember questions to the administration before Assembly meetings, establishing a process to publish the questions to the public. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield. Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Zalaton.
Christopher Constant. And on the phone, we have Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Bronga.
Here, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Salt.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Thank you, and Mr. Johnson. Are you there, Mr. Johnson?
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
There you are. Great, thanks. So good morning, everybody. And so for the purposes of good order, we've been having a discussion between the clerk and the administration about how to ensure that when assembly members are asking questions, the questions are getting answered, but then all members are seeing the response so that everybody has the same information. And in that case, we should publish it so that the public understands the questions and answers as well. And so for the purposes of this discussion, we've been having a background conversation between Mr. Falsey, Chief Administrative Officer, also the clerk, and also council to establish a process that is going to bring more light to all of the decisions that we make. And so you asked for a couple minutes. Is this a couple minutes enough, or do you need a couple more?
Is enough as long as I can figure out how to display my screen. Boom.
All right, Mr. Falsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the Assembly. I was challenged by the chair to give you a PowerPoint presentation, so I put one together in 5 minutes. So we're gathered here today to talk about what this AIM was that showed up laid on the table at the last Assembly meeting, and a little bit of what is old is new again. In my prior go-round in the municipality, it was the standard practice to solicit from the Assembly members questions about any agenda item ahead of the meeting, and then we would try to respond to them as an administration and get you answers ahead of the meeting. We would like, as an oncoming administration, to renew that prior practice. I think there was a lot of benefits for both sides. It really clarified some things that we didn't have to make sausage in the Assembly meeting in the chambers themselves. It made the meetings run a little bit more smoothly. I will say it creates a fire drill for myself, and it will also create a fire drill for Rebecca Wynn-Pearson, who is not here yet to defend herself or prevent this from happening. So I'm causing this problem for her and myself by talking about it to you today. In the olden times, what we would do is we would solicit questions to go to the municipal manager about all the different agenda items. Those would get cut up, sent out for routing to the various departments, then reassembled by the municipal manager and sent to all of you at the same time, so that everyone had to have the benefit of every member's questions and the administration's response to all of them. Since it seems like that process had not actually been happening in the last several years, we thought maybe we can even improve upon the old way. And so the reason that Assembly Information Memorandum showed up on the agenda is we thought, just as it is helpful for the two branches and the various Assembly members to all have insight into what questions are being raised and what answers are being provided, of course, that would be helpful for the public too. Sometimes when we're making necessary clarifications on AIMs or AIMs or ordinances, it's not clear from the paper themselves. Sometimes we're catching errors, and the public could have the benefit of that too. So the pitch to Assembly leadership from the oncoming administration is, why not you guys all send us questions? We will do our best to respond to them, and then we'll show everybody our work. It's not intended to be a highly formalistic thing. As you saw last time around, there was a real simple cover AIM that said, here are the administration's responses to the Assembly member questions. And then you just saw appended emails. I think timing wise, we're probably not going to make any kind of formal memos. But we wanted to let you know that that was the sort of ongoing preference. So that if you send us incoming questions, that we would turn around and make those public as well. So the purpose of this short Assembly meeting is to talk about timing and deadlines. And this, I think, is actually going to be a negotiation. This next slide, I don't think I even got to finish, but here we go. In order to make this work as well as possible, here's an opening pitch, and maybe the answer is you don't like this, but we'll figure it out. So when we publish the regular agenda, that creates a first window where everybody can see all the items on the agenda other than the addendum and other than the laid on the table items. If you could get us questions after the Friday publication of the agenda by, say, midday Tuesday, we can for sure get answers to all of those questions back to you ahead of the addendum deadline. And then every addendum could have administrative responses to assembly member questions about this meeting. And that would be great. It turns out, I know that in practice, a lot of folks are waiting to pick up the whole agenda until the addendum is actually published. I think we could do yes and we could do both. If you get us whatever questions you get us ahead of time, we would try to get to the addendum. Anything that lagged after the addendum, we could include later. And then if anything came in before the meeting, we could either lay it on the table as a supplement to the AIM or catch it at the next meeting, which is obviously a little less helpful to the public as they're seeing items that are worked on in the meeting and then learning about that transactions that happened or discussion that happened at the following meeting. But all that is to say, this is the mischief that we have cooked up. This is the invitation to you. And I think we are hoping just to have an open discussion about it all.
Discussion that will last approximately 7 minutes more, 8 minutes more. So, Ms. Salatil.
Thanks. So that's really loud today. I see why you would love for us to get you questions with the initial publication of the agenda. I'm one of those members who isn't going to look at the initial agenda. I'm not going to look until I have the addendum and the full packet. What I think is most valuable from the way we did it in the before times was we would get one set of answers in the end to all assembly member questions sometime on Tuesday, the day of the meeting. So they would be kind of gathered from addendum published through the weekend and Monday. You would go back at that time as municipal manager, gather all the answers. They'd come back through the clerk's office. And on Tuesday, you would kind of get answer to assembly's questions. And the really helpful thing about having them all in one place with all member questions and all member answers is I could then take them in my agenda and go, okay, those were my questions, but also here is what everyone else asked. And I would literally print it. I'm a paper agenda person and put it in my agenda. So that's having it one time versus multiple places that I have to go look for those answers unless we're contemplating a progressive document where whatever went in the addendum then it has an A version for the line on the table, which might be one way to do that. But having one document I found most helpful. So that's my 2 cents.
Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Yeah, I was also thinking of timing, and I've had the goal for the last year to not have been reading the agenda the day of the meeting, right? But I just haven't been in that space. Anyway, the practical challenge I see with the Tuesday noon is I believe that's when we get a PDF copy of the agenda itself, and I don't believe we get all the items, or at least it's not easy to see the items. And so I think that just needs to move back further. And I wonder, I guess I just want to also think about, is the purpose to get really detailed questions and put those all directly in the packet? Because that also creates, more paperwork and all those other things. So I'm wondering, like, what is the value of putting it on all of that detail on the agenda? I mean, I understand the goal of transparency, right? These are all public records either way. But I just wonder, is it more practical to, circulate them by email, for example, but not try to meet the agenda deadlines themselves? Because I just think practically speaking, it's not what you're going to end up getting is not a lot of questions, or questions maybe from one person that happens to have read it. And so it won't kind of meet the goals that you have. But I do think there's a goal. And I think if we can land on a reasonable deadline, like the end of day Monday or something like that, because I know I've emailed people, a few hours in advance and felt bad about that, but that was because I was behind. So just something to kind of work out what is a realistic schedule, I think is really helpful. And I appreciate that.
So through the chair to Assemblymember Bali, I think ultimately the invitation is to send us questions whenever you can, because it's always, I think, helpful for us to be able to gather the information on a slightly ahead of the actual meeting. So we will do whatever you guys want to do. I think the idea could be that we would have the standing AIM and then we will just append stuff as it is ready. So maybe there's every meeting now like a late on the table where we put the rest of the email traffic behind it. And again, somewhat informally, but I think that's all we need to do. Your question was about the level of detail of the questions. That's up to you too. In the past, it was everything from why are we doing this to I don't understand this to John Weddleton would say on page 17 of this 38-page ordinance, isn't table entry number 2 an error? And we would say, yes, it is, John. And we would have it ready to be fixed at the assembly meeting. So I think we'll do whatever level of detail comes in.
And just really briefly, I just want to note too, to the extent that we're putting those documents on the agenda, it will create more work for the clerk staff, as you know. So that's also what I'm thinking about is, do we really need to put all the emails that say, what is this, in the agenda packet itself? It feels a little bit excessive to me, but.
So I want to make sure, Anna, you understand that Bill just threw down the gauntlet at you. And speaking of John Weddleton, page 37, paragraph 5, table 3. So, but I think that, and Felix, you are in the queue. We'll let you go first before we wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And if folks in the room can thank you. So I really like this idea. I think there are only a few members currently on the assembly who were here during the olden days when there were a lot of questions sent by multiple assembly members to the administration, and it helped to alleviate some of the lengthy consent agenda discussions that we sometimes have gotten ourselves into in the last several years. And I think in my part, what the administration is proposing really closes the loop of our prior practice, whereas all of those questions were just sort of internal questions and helped our decision-making process. And the public never got to see any of those. I think this is a simple way to get the public on the same page as we are as decision makers. I would say however simple we can make it so it reduces stress on the clerk's office would be helpful. So even if it's just like a one-time kind of thing where it's something that gets, like I would find it difficult for it to make the addendum agenda, to be frank. So even if it's something that's just a regular laid on the table item, even that I think is better than what we've done in the past where there's just been no transparency. Thank you.
And on that subject, in our discussions, the clerk and I had been talking about this even before the administration. That this conversation came up between the branches is exciting because it's alignment. The late on the table process has an interesting 8-vote requirement, and we debated back and forth some whether, because these are responses to questions on the agenda, these items are in fact supplementary and wouldn't require the late on the table procedure. And so to your point, Felix, the idea in the long run would probably be to have a slight amendment to section 230 that would allow for these to just be entered by reading the title and none of the other procedures. But I think you're right that the late on the table timeline is the one timeline that's going to work for members. And so bottom line, we're out of time. Karen, you had a question or comment. The question is, who do questions get sent to? And ultimately, the most important thing is that it's streamlined and orderly. And so it's either to the manager or to the chief administrative officer is the ideal place for the brokerage of questions out to the departments for responses. You can always approach the department heads for questions separate from this kind of agenda process. So no one would tell you you can't do that other than, maybe a previous municipal manager. But so the strategy is to communicate through a couple points of contact so that the responses are coordinated. With that, though, I don't know that we answered exactly the question, but I think the feedback is pretty clear. And we will finalize this process in some form of a memo will come out to say this is the final plan.
About Tuesday.
Meg.
So, oh yeah, that's right. We've been told we just don't need to get close to these anymore. Old habits. So for Tuesday's agenda, this next upcoming meeting, would you like us to send our questions to who? Because I know Becky's starting, I believe, yeah, right there. She walked in. It's like she was ready for our questions. But who would you like us to send our questions to? And then when would you like to have us heat up to receive those responses?
I would say it would be probably most helpful if you send it to both me and to Becky, and then we can route it to our various reports. And as soon as you can get them to us, we'll get them back to you as soon as we have the answers. I think practically in the olden times, we always tried to get it to you probably by noon of Tuesday. And sometimes folks may remember that that meant we would have, Weddleton questions 1 through 13, and 2 of them would say, we're still gathering information on this one, because we knew eventually it had to be to you in order to be useful. So some of the things lagged and we had to address them in the meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this work session. We'll be back in about 8 minutes for a confirmation hearing.